From where I sit, as someone who spent decades deep in the world of American firearms ownership, the ATF's grip on suppressor regulation is slipping faster than just about anybody figured it would. What used to be etched in stone under the National Firearms Act now looks like it's starting to crack quietly, sure, but plain as day if you're paying attention. Could this be the first domino tipping in the slow, steady undoing of NFA rules wrapped around suppressors and short-barreled rigs? In this video, we're going to break down how one massive budget move might have handed gun owners their biggest legislative win in a whole generation. We'll walk through what's tucked inside that bill, the roadmap that might just yank suppressors clear out from under NFA control, and what that'd mean for Form 4 paperwork, tax stamps, agency workloads, and the shifting legal ground already moving under our boots. We'll also take a look at what's next for the Short Act, how it all ties into a not-so-famous Senate rule called the Byrd Rule, and why this moment might just redraw the lines across the civilian firearms market for good. From titanium parts getting ordered up to political chess moves in D.C., from long-overdue legal traction to the surprise fallout of 1934, there's a heck of a lot more in motion here than most folks see on the surface. And if the Senate moves fast, your next suppressor could be a buy-it-and-go deal, no more fingerprints. No more waiting game. The National Firearms Act don't come up much in modern gun talk, but it's still the spine behind nearly every hoop we jump through today. It was hammered out during the rough and tumble days of the Great Depression, back when gangsters were running wild with Thompson submachine guns and trench shotguns, turning those tools into symbols of pure chaos and fear. Way back then, even the National Rifle Association, the same one that's known now for holding the line against regulation, was working hand-in-hand with Congress to draft laws aimed at what they called gangster guns. Suppressors, short-barreled rifles, and short-barreled shotguns all got tossed into the same bucket under a $200 transfer tax, an amount that, in 1934, was sky-high and clearly meant to block ownership more than raise any honest revenue. Time went by, inflation did its thing, and that $200 became more of a thorn than a wall. But the red tape stuck around. You still had to roll through fingerprints, mugshots, a pile of paperwork, and a wait time with no real end in sight, all just to shoot a little quieter or take the edge off the recoil. For 4 decades after the law passed, the NRA and lawmakers up on Capitol Hill kept a working relationship going. They even backed the Federal Firearms Act of 1938, and lent support to a few of the legislative shakeups that came after those high-profile assassinations in the 1960s. But that uneasy truce came to a screeching halt after 1971, when an ATF raid ended with one NRA member dead. That set off a wave of grassroots anger, and the shift in leadership during the 1977 Cincinnati revolt brought in the hard-nosed crowd folks who swore they'd fight any new gun control tooth and nail. What darn near nobody saw coming back then was that, close to 50 years later, it wouldn't be marches in the street or courtroom rulings, but plain old congressional budget math that would yank the NFA into the spotlight. Now, fast forward to this month. The House of Representatives passed House Resolution 1, what they're calling the one big beautiful bill by the skin of its teeth, 215 to 214. Buried in close to 400 pages of legal speak is Section 2 of the Hearing Protection Act. That part cuts suppressors clean out of the National Firearms Act. No tax, no registry, no background check, no fingerprint cards, just gone. The folks backing it say it's about dang time. Sportsmen and competitive shooters have been risking permanent hearing damage for years, 'cause firing off a 12-gauge at daybreak still kicks up more noise than an ambulance blowing through town. The ones against it argue that dialing sound down by 20 to 35 decibels makes it tougher for law enforcement to track down active shooters. But let's not kid ourselves, suppressors don't hush anything. A suppressed shot still rings out louder than a jackhammer tearing up asphalt. Still, perception's a powerful thing. And it's that perception that's got the pro-gun crowd cheering over a surprise twist in the rules called budget reconciliation. Unlike most bills, reconciliation skips past the Senate filibuster and gets through with a plain majority. That's allowed because its core job is to deal with taxes and spending. That procedural shortcut's been around since the Congressional Budget Act of 1974, which is where the Byrd Rule came from, named after Senator Robert Byrd. That rule tosses out anything not directly tied to government revenue. And right there's the opening. Suppressor rules live under the Internal Revenue Code as a transfer tax collected by the Department of the Treasury. So if that tax gets zeroed out or just plain deleted, all the rules tied to it vanish right along with it, not from some big courtroom fight over the Second Amendment, but as a quiet little budget line change in Uncle Sam's income ledger. When critics pushed back in the Rules Committee, the Senate parliamentarian reportedly brushed it off. Repealing a tax, after all, hits the budget straight on. End of story. And the numbers tell their own tale. American gun owners have already registered close to 5 million suppressors. Just in the first 6 months of last year, another 1,400,000 got added to the pile. Freedom of Information Act. Data from the ATF makes it real clear the system's busting at the seams. Paper Form 4s were taking close to a year. Even the fancy electronic system couldn't keep pace. Approval times stretch from 90 days to 180, then on out to 270. And even though they're trying to automate what they can, dealers are losing sales, customers are backing out, and ATF examiners are buried in cardboard boxes stacked high with old Form 4473s and out-of-date NFA packets. If suppressors get cut loose from the National Firearms Act, millions of records would vanish overnight, clearing up a whole lot of time and energy for agents to go after real threats instead of chasing paperwork from duck hunters and weekend range folks. Even the Congressional Budget Office admitted the Hearing Protection Act would lower federal revenue by about $1.4 billion over the next 10 years, a tiny ripple in the nearly $6 trillion federal budget. Supporters say that's a trade well worth making. Less red tape, fewer slip-ups, and more boots on the ground where crime's actually happening, not hounding regular folks just looking to save their hearing. Short-barreled rifles and shotguns are now moving along a track right beside suppressors. There's a new proposal on the table, called the Stop Harassing Owners of Rifles Today Act, or just the SHORT Act for short. It's been introduced in both the House and the Senate. The idea is simple. Yank barrel length rules clean out of the National Firearms Act. The lawmakers pushing for it say it's a straight-up answer to last year's brace mess. When the prior administration tried to reclassify nearly 40 million brace-equipped carbines as unregistered short-barreled firearms, the flood of lawsuits stopped enforcement in its tracks. All of a sudden, millions of law-abiding folks found out their plastic arm brace might land them square in felony territory. Wiping out the barrel-length rules would slam that door shut for good and make every pending court case moot. That said, the road ahead for the SHORT Act's a whole lot steeper than the one for suppressors. The big hang-up is that short-barreled rifles and shotguns don't have the same tidy tax tie-in. Sure, they're hit with that same $200 transfer tax, but they dip into parts of the criminal code that define restricted firearms in a broader, stickier way. Senate aides are already burning the midnight oil, trying to write language that threads the needle linking the change to excise tax revenues tight enough to get it through the Byrd Rule clean. Meanwhile, grassroots gun rights groups from Gun Owners of America down to local state outfits have been flooding the Capitol phone lines, demanding both bills move forward together in the reconciliation process. Inside the ATF, the chatter's all over the place. Field agents out tracking straw buyers say there's not much public safety gain in maintaining a federal registry of metal tubes, especially when around 1/3 of all Form 4 applications show up with typo-riddled or duplicated serial numbers. Even the higher-ups admit that the new form launched last winter nearly brought their servers to their knees. There's no doubt the NFA division would shrink a fair bit if suppressors get pulled out, since the budget follows the workload. But folks who've been around the agency a while know that when Congress takes one job away, it usually hands back another. Axing suppressor oversight might just mean reassignment shifting staff toward hunting, forced reset triggers, or beefing up the firearm trace data systems. What's got the senior brass twitching most, though, is the precedent. If suppressors can be scrubbed from the NFA quietly through budget reconciliation, what's stopping lawmakers from rolling back machine gun part restrictions next? One insider even cracked a joke that the Browning Ma Deuce belt fed might end up labeled a hearing-safe accessory by the time the next budget rolls around. From a legal angle, pulling suppressors out of the NF kicks off a whole chain reaction. First, that $200 tax stamp vanishes. Second, suppressors drop down to Title I firearms under the Gun Control Act. That means buyers would just fill out a Form 4473, pass a background check, and walk out the same day. No fingerprints, no waiting, no federal registry. States still have their own rules, naturally. Bans in places like Illinois and New Jersey would stick around unless their lawmakers decide to act. But at the federal level, all those old roadblocks would disappear. Travel rules would shift too. Instead of locking suppressors in a hard case with a tax stamp slapped on top, you could just toss one in your range bag alongside a scope or bipod so long as the state you're heading to allows it. Third, the use of NFA trusts and corporations would start to fade out. The whole reason folks formed a trust in the first place, so they could share an item without sending in individual fingerprints, would be gone. Handing suppressors down in a will would get easier too. Instead of working through some complicated legal trust, you could leave it to your kids or grandkids like you would a shotgun or fly rod. So what happens to all the paperwork? The ATF's NFA branch has got decades' worth of records stashed away, some digital, some on old-school microfilm, reaching all the way back to World War II. Privacy-minded gun owners have long dreamed of seeing those files tossed into a shredder or tossed on a burn pile. But it's not quite that easy. Under National Archives policy, tax records like these are treated as temporary business files and are already marked for destruction. Still, archivists sometimes push to hang on to historically important material. One middle ground idea already being kicked around is to seal old Form 4s behind the same legal lockbox used for abandoned Form 1s tied to machine gun blueprints. That way, they'd be off limits to the public, not gone, but boxed up and buried. If this legislation gets signed into law, then rulemakers would need time to hammer out the nitty-gritty. That includes public notice and comment periods, which could stretch the whole thing out to 18 months or so, putting real-world changes somewhere in fiscal year 2027. Now, the financial ripple in the civilian market would show up right away. Right now, most suppressors go for about $600 before you even factor in the stamp. Dealers usually tack on another $200 for that transfer tax, plus another $50 for the fingerprint cards and passport-style photos. If that tax and wait time go away, that same customer could walk in, pick out a can, pass a 10-minute NICS background check, and head home with it paying just the shelf price. Suppressor makers are already calling for at least a 20% jump in sales in the first year, same kind of boom they saw in New Zealand before that 1919 confiscation push. Insurance companies figure injury claims will dip as more folks use proper hearing protection. Audiologists say rifle fire without a suppressor, often hitting around 160 decibels, can cause instant and permanent damage. On the flip side, some police trainers are raising concerns about forensics. Suppressed rounds still punch past the pain threshold, sure, but the way muzzle blast spreads out can make it tougher to figure which way the shots came from in tight city streets. The FBI Ballistic Research Facility has already gone ahead and ordered updated acoustic arrays to keep up with the change. On the political side, this reconciliation tactic gives Republican lawmakers one heck of a talking point going into the next election cycle. They get to say they cut a tax that's been hanging around since the Great Depression, all in the name of constitutional rights, while at the same time extending Trump-era tax breaks and sending more money toward border security. Democrats, meanwhile, are caught in a real tight spot. If they try to yank the suppressor part out of the bill, they run the risk of looking like obstructionists gunning down a middle-class tax cut. But if they leave it in, they're gonna catch heat from donors who favor strict gun laws. A few moderates have kicked around a so-called compromise. Keep the transfer tax at $0, but leave the registry in place. Pro-Second Amendment groups aren't buying it. They've taken to calling it NFA light, just more paperwork with none of the open market benefits folks are looking for. Inside the Senate, there's only 3 numbers that count: 51 votes, a 10-hour debate limit, and a green light from the parliamentarian. On paper, Republicans hold 51 seats, maybe 53 if you count the 2 independents that lean their way. If every part of the bill passes the Byrd Rule check, then they don't need a single Democrat to sign on, which don't happen often in today's politics. If the suppressor piece makes it through the last rounds of negotiation, folks close to the Hill say the bill could land on the president's desk by early July, just in time for Independence Day headlines about a new age of sound, moderated freedom. Now, the short act's got a tougher road. More likely than not, it'll show up as a floor amendment. If it clears the Byrd Rule hurdle, then the Senate votes on it outright. If not, its backers are already sketching out backup plans, maybe wedge it into the final bill as a short-term pilot program, or write in a 5-year phase-out for the barrel-length rules. For everyday gun owners, the smartest move right now is to hang back and wait. Filing a fresh Form 4 today could mean fork in over $200 for a tax that might not even exist by the end of summer. Gun shops are already seeing buyers pulling back, holding out for the day they can walk in, grab a suppressor, and walk out same as they would with a bolt-action rifle, no waitin', no stamp. At the same time, prices on pre-owned suppressors are starting to dip. So if you're the type who values certainty more than perfect timing, there are some deals worth sniffing out. Folks with e-form submissions already in the system are wondering if the ATF's going to hand back their tax money if the change goes through. History says don't bet on it. Back in 1992, during that limited machine gun amnesty, nobody saw their fees refunded. The forms were stamped, approved, and the money got shuffled off into other Treasury buckets. Chances are, we'll see the same outcome here. Meanwhile, the advocacy machine ain't taking a breather. The day after the House pushed the bill through, Capitol phone lines lit up like a wildfire. One congressional aide said the number of calls about suppressors actually topped the usual wave of chatter they get on foreign aid. Grassroots groups are building their message around good old constitutional fairness, drawing lines to the First and 14th Amendments. They're saying that just like poll taxes and Bible taxes got struck down, so should taxes on firearm accessories. Volunteers keep reminding folks to keep their calls short and polite, since staffers don't record speeches, they count positions. On the other side, anti-gun packies are cranking out panic-laced emails to donors, warning of silent killers roaming city streets. Both camps are fired up, and that tells you one thing clear as day. Even after 9 decades, the National Firearms Act still packs a political punch. The mainstream media, as usual, is riding the same tired trail. Headlines scream silencer bill to grab clicks, even though the legal terms are firearm muffler or silencer. A few health reporters are taking a steadier route, talking OSHA-style noise limits and hearing protection. Others lean on ER docs who paint grim scenes of confusion from suppressed gunshots bouncing around city alleys. But nuance don't tend to stick. A suppressed AR-15 still roars out more than 50 decibels, louder than a jackhammer. Then again, nuance don't boost ratings, and the YouTube algorithm sure as hell loves a bit of outrage. Behind the scenes, suppressor makers are gearing up for a tidal wave. A major plant out in West Virginia has already gone to 3 full shifts, expecting demand to spike by as much as 700,000 units if this bill clears the finish line. American titanium suppliers are smiling. With Chinese alloys still under steep tariffs, the mills up in the Appalachians are looking at a windfall from the run-up in production. Financial markets didn't waste any time. Publicly traded silencer companies saw their stock prices jump by 10% right after the House vote. Funny enough, the insurance markets barely flinched, tells you Wall Street sees this as a win for recreational gear, not some kind of liability powder keg. Civil rights attorneys are watching this real close. If Congress willingly rolls back suppressor rules, don't be surprised if lawsuits start flying at the post-1986 machine gun freeze from the Hughes Amendment. Plaintiffs are likely to argue that letting pre-86 guns spike in value while blocking new ones violates equal protection, basically saying the government's letting the rich own full autos while shutting out regular folks. So far, the courts have kept their boots out of that mess. But if suppressors get deregulated through reconciliation, the government's go-to excuse that it's all just about collecting revenue starts looking mighty thin. When it comes right down to it, this whole suppressor showdown now hangs on 2 senators who still haven't decided whether they care more about their public image or following the fine print of Senate rules. If even one of them backs out, the suppressor piece gets stripped out and the House will have to eat the loss. But if both give the nod and President Trump signs off, suppressors could go from months of waiting to same-day pickups. Gun shops are already talking about midnight launches if that happens. And if the SHORT Act rides shotgun, it might finally clear up the muddy legal waters around braced pistols, AR-style handguns, and those mare's leg lever-action rifles. If not, that whole barrel-length fight's going to have to wait till after the next round of elections. That's all we've got for today. So what's your take? Should the government scrap the suppressor tax for good? Is it time to crank up the pressure on the SHORT Act? Drop your thoughts down in the comments. And if you want to stay sharp on where this whole fight's heading, hit that thumbs up, pass this video along to your crew, hit subscribe, and tap the notification bell. This battle ain't over, not by a long shot, and it's just starting to heat up.